There's a Big Block Chevy that made more horsepower per cubic inch than the legendary 427, had better low-end torque than the 454, and could out-rev every other rat motor Chevrolet ever built. Only 7,700 of them were made. Most were scrapped or forgotten. And 99% of people who claim to know big blocks have never even heard of it. It's called the 366 tall deck, and if you've never seen one, you're not alone. It was never sold in a production car, never advertised in Hot Rod magazine, never put in a Chevelle or a Corvette. Chevrolet built it exclusively for medium-duty trucks and school buses in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Then they discontinued it, and everyone forgot it existed. But here's what makes this engine absolutely insane. The 366 uses the exact same block architecture as the 427 and 454. Same bore spacing, same bell housing pattern, same motor mounts. You could bolt a 366 into any big block Chevy application, and nobody would know the difference until you opened the hood. And when you did, they'd see an engine that revs to 6,500 revolutions per minute in factory form while making torque numbers that embarrass modern LS engines. This is why the 366 tall deck is the most underrated big block Chevy ever made. Why GM killed it, even though it was better than the engines people actually wanted. And why the few people who know about it are buying every one they can find before the secret gets out. The 366 isn't just a destroked 454. It's not a bored-out 350. It's a completely unique engine that shares almost nothing with the BBC engines people actually know about. And that's exactly why it's so good. The displacement is 366 cubic inches. Bore is 3.935 inches, and stroke is 3.76 inches. The 427 is 4.25-inch bore by 3.76-inch stroke. The 454 is 4.25-inch bore by 4.0-inch stroke. So the 366 has a shorter stroke than the 454, but keeps the longer stroke of the 427. This creates an engine that breathes like a big block, but revs like a small block. But here's where it gets interesting. The 366 uses a tall deck block. Most BBC engines have a 9.8-inch deck height, meaning the distance from the crankshaft centerline to the top of the block is 9.8 inches. The 366 tall deck is 10.2 inches. That extra 0.4 inches doesn't sound like much, but it changes everything about how the engine breathes and revs. The taller deck allows longer connecting rods. The 366 uses 6.135-inch rods compared to the standard BBC 6.135-inch rods. Wait, those are the same length. That's the point. Because the 366 has a shorter stroke, the same length rod creates a much better rod-to-stroke ratio. The 366 has a 1.63-to-1 ratio. The 454 has a 1.53-to-1 ratio. That difference is massive. Better rod ratio means better everything. The piston spends more time at top dead center, which increases cylinder pressure and torque. The rod angle is less aggressive, which reduces side loading on the cylinder walls and piston skirts. The engine revs smoother and faster because the piston isn't changing direction as violently. The 366 feels like a destroked race motor because that's basically what it is. And the ports are massive. The 366 came with open chamber heads that flow 280 CFM on the intake side completely stock. The legendary 427 heads flow 270 CFM. The common 454 heads flow 250 CFM. The 366 heads are better than both straight from the factory. Why? Because GM designed this engine for commercial use where it needed to make power all day, every day, for 300,000 miles. They over-engineered everything. Chevrolet didn't build the 366 for hot rodders. They built it for medium-duty trucks that needed to haul heavy loads without destroying themselves. Think dump trucks, delivery trucks, and those short school buses you remember from elementary school. These applications needed an engine that could produce massive torque at low RPM, but also rev high enough to cruise at highway speeds while fully loaded. The problem with using a 454 in these applications was simple. The 454 made great torque but had terrible fuel economy and couldn't rev. A loaded truck climbing a hill would lug the engine, causing it to overheat and wear out prematurely. The solution was an engine with shorter stroke for higher revs and better breathing for more power at high RPM. That's the 366. Production started in 1968 and ended in 1991. But here's the catch. Only the 1968 to 1972 models used the tall deck block. From 1973 onward, GM switched to standard deck height to save manufacturing costs. Those later 366 engines are just a stroked 427S with nothing special about them. The tall deck versions from 1968 to 1972 are the ones everyone wants, and those are insanely rare. Total production of tall deck 366 engines is estimated at around 7,700 units. Most were installed in trucks that got worked to death and scrapped. The engines that survived usually ended up in junkyards where they were crushed because nobody knew what they were. GM never advertised them, never promoted them, never told anyone they existed. They were just industrial engines that came in trucks. Most people never saw. Then, in the 1990s, a few drag racers started finding them. They'd pull a 366 out of a scrapped school bus, bolt it into a race car, and realize they had an engine that revved to 6,500 revolutions per minute stock and made 450 horsepower with just headers and a carburetor. Word started spreading quietly through the racing community. Most of the engines were already gone. Everyone worships the 427. It's the engine that powered the Corvette to victory at Le Mans. The engine that dominated NASCAR in the 1960s. The engine that every muscle car guy dreams of owning. And the 366 is better in almost every measurable way. The 427 makes 435 horsepower in L88 form. That's 1.02 horsepower per cubic inch. The 366 makes 310 horsepower completely stock in truck form. That's 0.85 horsepower per cubic inch. Sounds worse, right? But the 366 is designed for reliability and fuel economy with tiny camshafts and restrictive exhaust. Put the same performance parts on a 366 that the L88 427 came with, and you're making 380, 400 horsepower from 39 fewer cubic inches. That's 1.04 horsepower per cubic inch, which beats the 427. But the torque curve is what matters. The 427 makes peak torque at 4,000 revolutions per minute. The 366 makes peak torque at 3,200 revolutions per minute and holds it flat to 5,500 revolutions per minute. That means the 366 has a 2,300 revolutions per minute power band where it's making maximum torque. The 427 has maybe 1,000 revolutions per minute. You can lug a 366 at 2,500 revolutions per minute, and it's still making full torque. Try that with a 427, and it falls on its face. The 366 revs higher, too. Factory redline on a truck. 366 is 5,000 revolutions per minute. Factory redline on a passenger car 427 is 6,500 revolutions per minute. But the 366 bottom end is stronger because it was designed for commercial use. You can safely rev a 366 to 6,800 revolutions per minute on stock internals. You can rev a 427 to 6,500 revolutions per minute if you're lucky and it doesn't throw a rod. And here's the killer advantage. The 366 weighs less than a 427. Not by much, maybe 25 pounds. But it's noticeable. Less rotating mass means faster acceleration and better handling. The shorter stroke means less reciprocating weight, so the engine spins up faster. In a drag car or road racing application, the 366 has better throttle response than any other rat motor. The 454 is the big block everyone knows. It's what came in the Chevelle SS, the El Camino, and thousands of trucks. It makes massive torque and tons of power. And it's a pig compared to the 366. The 454 has a 4.0-inch stroke. That long stroke makes incredible torque at low RPM. But it also makes the engine feel lazy. The piston has to travel further, which means it takes longer to complete each rotation. The rod ratio is terrible at 1.53 to 1, so the piston is constantly changing direction violently. This creates side loading on the cylinder walls that causes premature wear. The 366 has a 3.76-inch stroke, that's 0.24 inches shorter, which doesn't sound like much. But that translates to the piston traveling 1.5 fewer inches per revolution. Over 6,000 revolutions per minute, that's thousands of feet less piston travel per minute. Less travel means less friction, less heat, and less wear. The engine revs faster because the piston isn't fighting physics as hard. The 454 is limited to about 5,500 revolutions per minute safely. The long stroke and poor rod ratio mean that above 5,500 revolutions per minute, the rod angles get so extreme that you're risking rod bolts stretching and pistons cracking. Some built 454 says can rev to 6,000 revolutions per minute, but you're on borrowed time. The 366 is safe to 6,500 revolutions per minute on stock bottom end. Built properly, they'll rev to 7,200 revolutions per minute all day. Fuel economy is night and day different. A 454 in a truck gets maybe 8 miles per gallon. A 366 in the same truck gets 12 miles per gallon. That's 50% better fuel economy from an engine that makes comparable power. Why? Better breathing, shorter stroke, less pumping losses. The 366 doesn't have to work as hard to move the same load. But here's what makes the 454 guys angry. You can stroke a 366 to 427 cubic inches by using a 4.0-inch stroke crankshaft. Now you have a 427 with tall deck block, better rod ratio, and ports that flow better than a real 427. It's basically a 427 L88 that's better in every way. And you built it from an engine that came out of a school bus. This is where the 366 becomes the best-kept secret in Big Block Chevy performance. The engine was designed for commercial use, which means it was built stronger than anything GM sold to the public. The block is a 4-bolt main design from the factory. Every 366 tall deck came with 4 bolts per main cap. The 427 only got 4-bolt mains in high-performance applications. The 454 came with 2-bolt mains unless you special ordered it. The 366 got the strongest block design as standard equipment because it had to survive in commercial service. The crankshaft is forged steel, not cast iron like the truck 454 Seth. Not even nodular iron like some performance 427S. Forged steel like the race engines. This crankshaft can handle 7,000 revolutions per minute indefinitely and 700 horsepower without braking. GM installed it in every 366 because these engines had to last 300,000 miles in trucks. The rods are heavy-duty truck rods. They're not as light as aftermarket rods, but they're stronger than standard BBC rods, and they can handle serious power. People have run 600 horsepower on stock 366 rods without issues. They're overbuilt because GM expected these engines to spend their entire lives at maximum load. The heads are the real treasure. Those open chamber heads that flow 280 CFM can be ported to 320 CFM without changing the valve size. The combustion chamber design is more efficient than standard BBC chambers. The intake ports are positioned better for equal distribution. These heads are worth $1,500 to $2,000 if you can find them. Here's what a basic 366 build looks like. Start with a 1968 to 1972 tall deck 366. Install a CompCam's XE 268 camshaft, which is a mild street cam. Add a 4-barrel intake manifold and 750 CFM carburetor. Install headers and true dual exhaust. That's it. You're now making 450 horsepower and 480 foot-pounds of torque, and the engine will rev to 6,500 revolutions per minute and get 14 miles per gallon in a truck. For comparison, that same build on a 454 makes 420 horsepower and 460 foot-pounds. Less power, worse fuel economy, and it won't rev past 5,800 revolutions per minute. The 366 is just better. Stroke it to 427 cubic inches. Use a 4.0-inch stroke crank, which is a direct bolt-in. Now you have 427 cubic inches with tall deck block and great rod ratio. Add aluminum heads, a bigger cam, and a good intake manifold. You're making 550 horsepower naturally aspirated. That's LS7 Corvette power from a 1960s truck engine. Forced induction is where it gets stupid. The 366 bottom end is so strong that people are running 15 pounds of boost on stock internals. That's 600 to 650 horsepower on an engine that originally made 310. The tall deck block handles the cylinder pressure better than a standard deck block. The forged crank and heavy rods laugh at boost. And the open chamber heads are perfect for forced induction because they don't have quench pads that create hot spots. The 366 tall deck stayed under the radar for decades because GM never marketed it and most of them were destroyed. But in the last 5 years, the secret has been getting out. And prices are skyrocketing. In 2018, you could buy a complete 366 tall deck engine for $500 to $800. It would be sitting in a junkyard or someone's barn, and nobody knew what it was. You tell them it's a truck, 366, and they'd let it go cheap because truck engines aren't worth much. Today, those same engines sell for $2,500 to $4,000. If the heads are in good shape, add another $1,500. A complete running 366 tall deck with good compression and no damage can bring $6,000 or more. The secret is out and prices are climbing fast. The problem is supply. There were only 7,700 made with the tall deck block. Most are gone. Every year more get scrapped because people still don't know what they are. The ones that survive are being snatched up by builders who understand what they have. In another 5 years, you won't be able to find one for any price. Engine builders who know about the 366 refuse to tell their customers what they're getting. They'll source a 366 tall deck, build it to 427 or 454 specs, and sell it as a custom race engine. The customer thinks they're getting a built 427. They're actually getting something better, but the builder isn't saying anything because they don't want people knowing where to find these engines. Drag racers have known for years. Stock eliminator racers have been using 366 tall decks for a decade because the engines are classified in a lower weight class but make more power than they should. They're allowed to run them because they're technically a truck engine, but they're competitive with engines 100 cubic inches larger. Hot rodders are just now catching on. YouTube channels are starting to feature 366 builds. Forums are discussing them. And every time someone posts about a 366 tall deck, the response is the same. People who've never heard of it suddenly want one. People who have heard of it are trying to find them before the prices go even higher. If you're at a swap meet or searching junkyards, here's how to identify a 366 tall deck before someone who knows what they're looking at gets there first. Look for the casting number on the back of the block above the bell housing. It should read 3946052 or 3963512. Those are the only two casting numbers used on tall deck 366 blocks. If you see those numbers, you're looking at one of the 7,700 engines made. Buy it immediately. Check the deck height with a tape measure. Standard BBC blocks measure 9.8 inches from the crank center line to the deck. Tall deck measures 10.2 inches. If you measure the block and it's 10.2 inches, that's a tall deck. Even if the casting number is worn off, that measurement tells you what you have. It's stamped on the front passenger side of the block near the cylinder head surface. The date code should be between 1968 and 1972. If it's later than 1972, it's a standard deck 366 and not worth the premium. Only the early ones matter. Check the displacement stamp on the front of the engine. It should say 366, but here's the trick. Some people don't know what they have and will list it as a 427 or 454 because they're not sure. If the displacement stamp is worn off or the seller doesn't know what it is, check the casting numbers. You might get a tall deck 366 for the price of a standard BBC because the seller doesn't know the difference. If you find one, buy it even if you don't have a project for it right now. These engines are appreciating faster than most classic cars. A $3,000 investment today could be worth $8,000 to $10,000 in 5 years as they get rarer and more people learn about them. It Rivios higher than a 454, makes more power per cubic inch than a 427, and has better low-end torque than both. Only 7,700 were made with the tall deck block, and most are gone forever. The few people who know about them are quietly buying every one they find before prices go completely insane. And if you've never heard of a 366 tall deck until right now, you're in the 99% who had no idea this engine even existed. But now you know, and now you know what to look for before someone else gets there first.